Welcome to this week's episode of the Good Luck Club podcast. Our mission here is to help 1 million people start a business of their own and make sure anyone who's started a business never feels alone doing it. I'm honoured to have an incredible angel investor and entrepreneur join us today, Sach Kukadia. He's going to share his knowledge with us. He's the founder of a very well-known startup called Secret Sales, which he sold. He's going to tell us how he built that company with his brother, what he achieved in his life as an entrepreneur, and share that knowledge with you so that you either get inspiration from his story or insights on how to build the dream business that you want to build. I firmly believe that no one's born anything. No one's born a doctor, no one's born a lawyer, and no one's born an entrepreneur. You are most likely an entrepreneur. There are different types of doctors. There are brain surgeons and there are GPs. They have different skills. They're different types of doctors. You are for sure a different type of entrepreneur maybe to the typical one you hear. That does not mean you're not an entrepreneur. If you're looking for a job today and you can't find one, then create one for yourself. You absolutely have the power to become an entrepreneur if you want. And at the very least, you can listen today and hopefully get inspired to learn from people that have done incredible things. In adversity comes opportunity. So I'd like to welcome my first guest. Sach, how are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. And that was a very inspiring, very appropriate given circumstances.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I feel honoured to have you here today. Now, can you please start off, if you don't mind, introducing yourself to the audience?
Sure. So my name is Sach Kukadia. I co-founded an online fashion company called secretsales.com back in 2007 with my brother Nish. I was a 22-year-old guy fresh out of university without any experience. And I guess echoing, what Simon just explained is that I didn't have the experience to start my company at that age. I didn't have the acumen, and I certainly had no idea what I was getting myself into. There was an opportunity and I ran at it at 100 miles an hour. I borrowed some money from a bank. I actually put my parents' house on the line and borrowed 100 grand. This other, again, not really appreciating the speed to which the business was going to scale. And in summary, and we can talk about this in more detail, but in summary, the business grew from 0 to 150 employees within about sort of 6 to 7 years. We raised over that period from institutional investors around 24 million, which the majority of that was equity based, and then there was a bit of debt that was chucked on at the end. And the business was sold to a private equity firm in 2017 when we reached sales of 47 million. And what a lot of people don't always know is that I ended up buying the company back a year later. And that was a very emotional journey for me. And I was fortunate enough to sell it for the second time in May 2019. And since then, I've been working as an investor of sorts. I've been a non-executive advisor to a handful of businesses. I'm also a chairman to another business, which is relatively new. And you guys, I'm sure, will hear about it soon. And I'm also in the process of starting a direct consumer business within the gold space. So I'm focusing a lot of my time on doing that. And I'm really excited to what that might lead towards. Again, I think your introduction was so good because everything that I'm doing is based on opportunistic areas that I feel have been created because of this world being somewhat mad and crazy. Rather than dwelling on why things are the way they are, and rather than allowing them to affect me, I'm sort of keeping my mindset super positive and super focused, and thinking about areas and things that I can do that will actually help me and the people around me, rather than just try to do the generic, I want to start a business because I want to change the world. It's more about, well, this is come out of that, and let's do something about it.
I already have so many questions. I love your story. And I think I want to understand so many things. First of all, I want to understand how the conversation went when you asked your parents to put their house on the line. And I want to know how you convinced them. Was it easy? Was it hard? Were they all in? Did it take time? How did the risk muscle in your brain cope with it?
So my parents are immigrants. They're both born and raised in Kenya. We're Indian by descent, and they were forced to come to the UK because of the political situation in Kenya. My father came at a really young age, at 13. My mother a little bit later, and they were forced to work really hard. Like my pops had about 3 or 4 jobs, cleaning dishes, ice cream factories, biscuit factories. Whatever he could do, he would do. And, there was, back in the 60s, it wasn't easy for an immigrant to come and get a job, right? There was still what was perceived as sort of racial discrimination. And there was challenges that both of my parents and everyone actually that I know who is an immigrant came into the country at that time. They all faced a very similar thing, which was if they don't start a business, they're not going to make any money, because actually getting a job was hard enough. Keeping the job was even harder. And so, my parents are entrepreneurs through and through. And I think this is one of the things and reasons why everyone in my family, including my siblings, they all run their own business, because it's been ingrained in us from a young age, like super, super young. I remember my father telling me that I should always, work for myself and not for anyone else. Not that there's any reason or problem with working for anyone else. But in his eyes, that was just a thing to do. And so when it came to asking him for money, he didn't even think. He was like, my kids want to start a business, and I'm going to do everything I can to support them. So there was nothing. My father is the most supportive person that he's so positive and super supportive and very focused. And it didn't take anything. In fact, like if I remember, it was probably his recommendation. I would never have suggested that. And equally, by the way, Simon, like I had no idea or perspective of the risk involved, right? Because at that age, I was living at home. I had no overheads, right? I had no liabilities, and I didn't realize what failure would have caused for my family. But equally, I'm not one to allow failure to happen easily either. So I'm always quite driven, and I was always going to try and make something work. But it helps to have supporting members of the family around you, for sure.
What's your father's name? I feel like he deserves a shout out. I want to remember his name.
His name is P.D. Kukadia.
P.D. Kukadia.
So he was actually he was involved during the early days of Pepe Jeans.
Yeah.
So Pepe Jeans was kicked off in Portobello Road Market in like 1972 by the Shah brothers, who for me are like uncles. So I grew up with them, and my father was close to them and was involved with the building of that brand. And my father then looked after Benelux Pepe, so Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. And actually, there's a lot of people that complain about their commutes. My father used to commute to Belgium every day, back and forth. He used to wake up at 5 or 4:30. My mum would drop him to the airport. He would fly to Belgium. He would work there, and then he would fly back. And then he would. I didn't see my dad for about 10 to 12 years, really. He was a weekend father, because he was always commuting, but he would come back just to see us in bed. Which I thought was really, later in life, I appreciated. Back then, I didn't really. He was just a very strict father that I was quite scared of, to be honest. But he was totally in it for the family, and he did everything he could to try and get the family the support that they needed, and I'm very grateful.
Isn't it amazing perspective as you get older and you look back? Maybe a lot of my listeners are young people, and maybe they resent their parents a bit for working too hard or whatever. As you get older, you realize how much that actually meant they loved you.
I don't have children. I mean, at least none that I know of. And they are, something changes in you when you have children, right? At least I've seen that from my brother. And it's a beautiful thing,
Do you
probably
have
the most beautiful
appreciation
thing
for
that
your parents a bit more for starts? You know, there's a
Mm.
starter. There's loads of, they're totally true. Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was good.
No, I think that there's an element here that I want to go a little bit deeper on for my audience to pick up on. I think I personally had no help from my parents. In fact, my father sadly passed away suddenly of a heart attack, and my mother kicked me out of home quite soon after that. And so I actually started a business at 15 years old with no family help. And I sometimes think that it was a good thing. I actually thank my mother now because it kind of made my entrepreneurial muscle wake up and make me go out there
Sure.
and make it happen. But it's something that actually touches me emotionally when I hear the support from a family member in that way. And I think what's really interesting about your story, well, there's many elements, but one thing I really want to pick up on and just dive into it for a second is, you know, your parents have kind of, I guess, always been entrepreneurs as long as you've been born, and therefore it's ingrained in you. But it was actually kind of, I guess, something they had to do because in 1960 there were no jobs, so they had to become entrepreneurs. So that's one of the things. Is an entrepreneur born or bred? I guess that's my question for you, and I think I know the answer, but I'm interested in what you think.
So this is a question I've been asked before, and I've toyed with my response. There were courses now at university, like at Imperial, for example, where you can do an entrepreneurial degree, which always bewildered me because I had no idea what you would teach. How would you teach someone how to hustle? Like
I've spoken at
you know,
Imperial, so I know that course very well. I'm a speaker for them, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
And I like Secret Sales was selected by 10 Downing Street to be part of a program called the Future 50. And off the back of that, we were approached by the London Stock Exchange to be a part of an elite program, which allowed me to do what was essentially a fast track MBA at Imperial. And that's where I learned about what, that they were doing all of these things. And if I look at my personal experience and I look at myself and my journey, I've hustled the hell out of everything, right? Like I used to sell mobile phones, used mobile phones. I started a pirate radio station when I was 16. And, that got me into a bit of trouble, but equally I made a lot of money from that because what a lot of people don't realize is that as the manager or owner of the radio station, every other person that comes onto your station pays you what is called the sub cost, right? Which is usually 10 or 20 pounds. But, and even if you're only on for Thursday to Sunday and you're on 24 hours a day, you're making, as a 16-year-old, more money than you can probably spend. My mother found some money underneath my bed. It was quite a large amount of money. And I remember like slapping me in the face and asking me where that had come from. And I explained to her that I wasn't selling drugs or anything. It come from the radio station. I think she was quite surprised that there was that much money. My father was, I think he was joyful, right? I mean, the fact that I was making money, I wasn't the easiest child to bring up. And I was suspended from school at the age of 9 for selling newspapers. Those newspapers had topless models on the center page. And I went to a private, very like posh school, which I was very fortunate to go to, who took a very huge disliking to the fact that I was selling legal. I was buying them myself, right? It wasn't illegal to go to the petrol station and buy these papers, but I was buying them for 30p and selling them for 150. Even at 9 years old, I didn't need the money, right? My dad and my parents, would have given me anything I wanted at that age. But there was something inside me that decided that was the right thing to do. And, that for me is quite indicative of someone who, and I'm not saying that every entrepreneur will have done something similar, but, to be an entrepreneur, and you said this quite well at the start of this interview, is that anyone can be an entrepreneur. You can do whatever you want, provided you put the mind to it, right? And I think the difference between someone who's an entrepreneur and someone that isn't is the fact that you've accepted that this is what you want to do, and then you end up going to do it. And then that turns that transition from existing environment, which it can be for a lot of people quite comfortable, right? Like I've spoken to countless people, friends of mine who all work in big corporates, earn very high salaries, who all dream of being an entrepreneur, but because they're so caught up in the security that corporates offer, which are, they've got the paycheck, they've got the health benefits, they might have dentists, they might have, and then the concept of starting a business where, well, hold on a minute, I'm not earning anything for a couple of years. And actually, I might not ever earn anything ever, right? I'm going to put a huge amount of money into something. I'm going to give it a go, and nothing might come out the back of it. And remember that most businesses that start fail, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't start it, right? And so, I've always sat in the camp of, I don't want to ask myself a what if. I want to make sure that I do everything I can that's in my power to know what could have been is. And, I've like even recently, and again, something else that we can talk to, but, my fiance is a singer, and, we've created a platform, a record label, so to speak, that sits around all of what she needs to do. I was never in this business to turn into the next Jay-Z or Rockefeller or whatever it may be, or Bad Boy, but I've created a vehicle for her to now really monetize and think about the opportunities that exist outside of conventions, and that really for me is the difference between someone who is working for someone and will always work for someone, or someone who's going to do something for themselves and drive forward. So in summary and conclusion to your question, can you learn to be an entrepreneur? I think you can. Can anyone be an entrepreneur? Yes, I agree with you. Anyone can be an entrepreneur, provided, and this is what separates people, is you need to have self-discipline. You need to have self-drive, and you need to really want it, right? You need to give yourself or allow yourself the understanding and the sacrifice of what you have to then think about what you need.
Well said. Well said. I think what I always try to tell people is that starting your own business is so hard at the beginning, but in fact, actually over time gets easier, especially as you can hire good people. But actually when you work for someone else, it's really easy at the beginning, but gets harder over time as, the management change and don't like you as much anymore, don't appreciate the previous hours you've done and so on. It actually gets harder over time. So it's true. It's a persistence issue, isn't it? Are you willing to have the pain now for the gain later? And as we all know from a million inspirational quotes, a lot of people aren't willing to do the pain at the beginning, right? So, but I'm fascinated by the relationship piece for you. I mean, there's two relationships I want to explore. One is the relationship with your mother. It sounded like she was a counterbalance to your father there. Was she also an entrepreneur? And then, what about your wife? I mean, how does she see the entrepreneurial world? Is she also, as a singer, I actually see her as an entrepreneur. Do you see her as an entrepreneur? And if so, how does the dynamic work between you?
Sure. So my mother was never she was never a businesswoman initially, right? She was a businesswoman. She was a housewife initially. She, married my father, had 4 children, of which I was number 2.
I'm number 2 as well, by the way. So that's why we're getting on so well. Clearly, we know that problem.
And I remember a point, my father was, he wasn't a big saver, right? Like he was always living in the moment. And my mother, without him realizing, was hoarding cash. She was saving it. And it just transpired later in life that they desperately needed money. And my mother pulled out this box, and my dad was like, where on earth have you got that money from? And my mother had secretly been, building this up in behind the scenes. And it was just like the story that they tell around that was beautiful. And my mother now, by the way, is probably the breadwinner in the family, right? So my father is he now works for my mum, right? My mum is, a super strong woman who is running, a bunch of different things. And she is a bit of a bull breaker. Like she's great. But as mothers go, like, the thing about my mum is that she's always put us first, right? Like all parents, right? But when I say put us first, my parents didn't come from anything in Kenya. And so what they try to do is bust the lifestyle that they always dreamt of. And the challenge with that, unfortunately, is, two things happen when you get given things at a young age. You get spoiled and you lose your drive, or, you've always had a drive and you end up doing it anyway, but you just don't do the stuff that they want you to do. And I think I was definitely the latter. And so, my mother now is, extremely busy. I actually have to tell her to slow down because it's worrying how much she has on her plate, and she doesn't know how to relinquish. That's the biggest issue. If I was to describe the biggest problem that both of my parents face, is that they are excellent at running businesses. They're very bad at delegating. And the thing is that you need, when it comes to building a business, and I learned this firsthand with my brother, is that, Secret Sales only got to like 50 million in sales because we really solid team of people who were better than us in every capacity, and they drove the business forward. And my parents are just control freaks, and that's not uncommon, right? A lot of entrepreneurs are control freaks. My fiance, when I met her, she didn't see herself as an entrepreneur, but I totally did, right? And she's got a lot of drive. She's very creative and she's amazing at what she does. And her name is Bambi Baines. And, for anyone that is wanting to go and listen to her stuff, she's actually just released a song under our management, which is called Big Bounce. And it's like Bambi Baines is Bains, and her song is Retro Rari. And it's done phenomenally well in a very short period of time. And she's got this big plan moving forward, and she's really ambitious and is driving forward. And I'm proud. Helping her succeed makes me very happy, right? And the other thing is that I'm 11 years her senior, so I would love to have a family, right? I'd love to have a bunch of rugrats running around and doing what all of my other friends are doing. But I've decided that I'm happy to sacrifice that, provided that she feels that she's giving everything that she's got to this. Because, going back to our point about entrepreneur and doing things because they have to do it, right, is, she's got an opportunity now, the way I see it, to really do well. And I don't want her in 10 years' time to turn around and be like, well, what if I didn't do that? Or what if I didn't give that a go, And if I forced her to have children now, or I encouraged her, I would never force her, but if I encouraged her to have children now, she will in 10 years' time, look back and think, what if? And also she'll probably resent me because I would have taken an opportunity away from her. And so what I'm doing is I'm compromising my future, my happiness of having a family, because I want her to be happy. I want her to give everything that she's got to this opportunity. And if it works, great, right? We both win. And if it doesn't, then we'll just have a fleet of babies after that, and it'll be amazing. But at least that way we know that we've given the opportunity everything that it was capable of, and we can then move on to the next thing.
I've just got kind of like what's the word? My hand hairs just stood up on end because of the emotion of what you're saying. I think I want my listeners to pick up on something really, really important here. Love is such an amazing thing that if you really love someone, your own happiness will come second. You fill your own bucket up first. We all know those sayings, right? But this dedication to, when you have true love, to making the other person have exactly what they deserve based on their talent and their love and their passion, I think this is so important. And you've spoken about your mother and your partner there. And I think that what I always say is that I'm only successful today because I found the right partner in life. Right? That is why I'm successful. There's no other. That's the only deal I've ever done as well. We literally kissed, and I gave her half of everything I've got, and she gave me half of everything she's got, and that's it. There's no contract. There's no terms of sale. There's nothing. It's just total, utter trust. And I wish we could get back to those sorts of deals in life because I hate lawyers. But the whole, the whole beauty of that dedication you have, where you're willing to make sacrifices, and I know if your wife's listening, I think it's very important to understand there's an element of what is our life going to look like, and we have no pre-recorded version of what it should look like. We almost go with the flow, right? You try this and see how it works. If you don't want to have regrets, that's for sure. You don't want to not try to pursue that music career if you've got a talent like Bambi sounds like she's got. By the way, we'll put all the links to her and your record label in this broadcast. Anyone wants to get access and have a listen, they'll be able to just click below. But I think it's really important, this love thing. I always say to entrepreneurs, and I would love your opinion on this, if you get your partner partnership right in life, whether that's your co-founder, which was your brother, I'd like to discuss that in a minute, or your actual life partner right, then everything else actually gets a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, that saying behind every man is a stronger woman. For me, is probably one of the most accurate statements that exists, because I know that without her here, my drive would be on very different things, and probably very selfish motivations, which is what it's always been, right? For my whole career, I've focused on creating value for myself and value in the success of money, but also in reputation. And I'm a high dreamer. I have a lot of really big ambitions, and I have a way of sort of funneling that energy and focus, which I think we should probably talk about at some point, because it's I'm very in it. But I'm sort of just I want the best for myself. I want the best for her, and I think that it's really important. I've changed since I've had someone who I know I want to spend the rest of my life with, and that for me, my vision for success, what I benchmark as success, and what I want in life, all of that's very different to pre-Bambi, right? So it's a very organic, very beautiful transition, one that I didn't see coming, I have to admit, but one that I'm very happy has come and I guess matured me into someone that I'm still sort of building.
I like what you're saying there about let's say being selfish, which somehow sounds negative. I think for people listening, this is actually very important. There's stages in life, right? And I think when you're young and trying to discover who you are and what you want out of life, I think people should be selfish. You should not do what your parents necessarily ask you to do. You should do what feels right for you. If going to university is right for you, then go. If it doesn't, I think the selfish thing is given a little bit of a bad rap, as if it's a negative thing. And I love the fact that you're mentioning it, and I love the fact you're talking about stages, because I think that's true. I mean, when I met my wife, I had exactly the same feeling. We actually started a business together and then worked together for 10 years. And I got to know her working with her. This is the other thing. I think working with your partner is also a way of, when I work with people, you find out about their moral code. You find out about their ethics. People can't hide it in business, especially if you're in partnership together. And that's a wonderful experience. Like moving in with someone, right? Like when you move in with someone, you discover all these things about them. I'm sure when you started working with Bambi, you fell in love even more. If you get that right.
Yeah. Well, outside of how beautiful she is, I didn't know she was a singer until much later, right? So that just really solidified, my desire to want to sort of, progress our relationship, because she was super talented. But as long as you fall in love for the right reasons, and provided that what's really important when it comes to finding someone who's going to support you in life is you've got to make each other better people, right? And you've got to actually raise each other's bars. So, as a unit, if you're with your partner, whoever he or she may be, and if you look at, yourself as a couple and as a unit, if you're not better together, right, and you're not making each other stronger, then for me, I'm not saying that's wrong, but that's what I look for, right? Is she making me a better person? Are we better together? Do I have qualities that she needs help with? If you then, it's like my father always said this thing where, you can break one pencil, right? But if you put two together or three together and try to snap them, you're not going to be able to do that. And so, I look at the team of me and Bambi as, being a stronger unit. And without doubt, there are things that she teaches me daily, and I hope that vice versa, she feels the same takeaway. And beneath all of this, we have had a lot of fun, right? It's a very loving relationship. There's a lot of giggles, and she's just a really good human being.
Fun is not used enough in business, isn't it? I think that word's so powerful and so underrated. It's such a great word. If you have fun in your business and you enjoy the journey, it almost doesn't matter what the outcome is.
Definitely.
And I also love the point you're talking about with this word stages, where, you know, your mother, who was a housewife, and that stage of, you know, when you're growing up, she was there for you, and then she probably learned from your father and learned from you guys, and then she steps forward almost and into her own light, as it were, and starts, you know, being the business person that she is today. That's also very inspiring. I think important for people to, you know, see that yeah, like I would say, I have a similar experience. My wife was always behind me, helping me make Fluid, which I sold to PwC, work. Wouldn't have worked without her. But now she's actually stepped forward. She's got her own business now, and she's a wonderful mother. And, you know, I almost see her like she's stepped into the light, and it's her turn. And I have a friend who, they have a partnership where every 3 years they swap roles. So one stays home and the other goes and tries to make something happen, and then they swap. It's kind of interesting dynamic, isn't it?
Sure. Well, I think, you know, my mother, for example, probably always had it in her to be an entrepreneur, but put her family first. And then only, you know, when we were of age, was able to then start doing the things that she perhaps wanted to always do. And now she's succeeding in all of those. So it's just nice. It's, you know, it's never over, right? If you feel like you've had children, or if you feel like you've had barriers in life and things that have always held you back, there's never a bad time to do something positive or to start a business, or, you know, there's always a million reasons as to why you shouldn't start a business. And that tends to be that you have your existing liabilities and what if it doesn't work and all of that stuff. So the best time to start a business is now. And, you know, I think my mother is a really good example of that.
Completely agree. It's an amazing story when you built up Secret Sales. And for my listeners out there, you know, who perhaps starting at zero, how did you get it to 0 to 10 people? And then, I mean, again, for my listeners that have existing businesses that are, you know, doing well, but they can't grow them, how did you get it from 10 to 115? How did you grow the business? What, any particular points in there that you think are worth sharing?
Yes. So it was 150 that we got to. It was even more than that at one point. But when it comes to building a business, there is the approach that you adopt when it's like real startup, which basically means you have to do everything, and you've got to really just hustle your way through all the different areas. And, you know, one thing I think is important to take away from being an entrepreneur is you don't need to know everything, right? A lot of people think, oh, I can't start this because I've no idea. Really, you just need to throw yourself into the deep end, and you will find a way to stay afloat. That's just how it is. And you learn on the job, and you make an incredible number of mistakes, and you will ultimately find a way through. If you want it enough, it'll work. And, you know, when we were 22, 23, when we started this business, I mean, I can assure you that I knew nothing, right? And I'd gone to Manchester University. You know, I wasn't a stupid child, but I also, I hated being told what to do. And I wasn't good in class because of that. And I was sort of, you know, I would only do stuff because I wanted to do it. So my teachers were always, oh, Sach, they would say to my parents, you know, he's one of the brightest kids we've taught, but he just doesn't want to work. And it's because I wasn't doing it for myself. And it wasn't until I started Secret Sales and, you know, the days at university when there was no one breathing down my neck, when I was like, well, I'm actually doing this for me, which is why I was great at university, you know, and Secret Sales launched 6 months after. And, you know, I just hustled my way through it and did everything I could to try and get it off the ground. My brother was instrumental as well, in credit to him, because he's my elder brother of 1 year and 8 months. His name is Nish. And he's just started a non-alcoholic drinks business called Zio. Which you can find called feelzio.com.
We'll put the link in the broadcast as well. Yeah, non-alcoholic drinks.
It's like non-alcoholic gin, vodka, whiskey.
Brilliant. Yeah.
But you know, when he started Secret Sales with me, we're both very different. Despite being brothers, our personality traits are on opposite ends of the spectrum. Right? I'm super extroverted. I'm a risk taker. I'm very intuitive. He is very considered. You know, doesn't have a huge amount of intuition, and will always want to evaluate circumstances mathematically. And what that resulted in was a combined effort and output, right? So there was never what I wanted, it was never what he wanted. It was a mixture of both. And that's really why I think the early days of Secret Sales worked, because we were taking a very medium view on our decision making. And what we did is we hired like one developer engineer who basically hacked everything for us. Whatever we needed, he hacked it. And we then hired a girl from South Africa. Her name was Cara. She came in as a copywriter. And, as the team grew, everyone took more and more responsibility within the business. You've got to hire people who are willing to do more than their job description in the early days. And, you then get it to a point where, they show their true colors. Like Cara she went from copywriter to my first ever buyer, to then the best buyer that anyone in the industry saw within our flash sale market, and was then poached by my competitor, and I poached her back because I was angry that they took her in the first place. And, there was all this stuff that happened. But there were transitions that take place, right? There was a point, I think, at 25 people where you suddenly realize that there was a cultural shift. And then that same shift happens at 75 people, where it becomes, it's no longer a family at 75 people. You're starting to turn into a bit of a corporate. There were processes in place and hires that take place and things that you do that, you're not involved in. Like there was a moment in time when we were sort of at 140 odd people or 130 people, 2015. I was still sort of, like in turning 30, if that. And I was having, like, the only way for me to know all of the people that were joining the business was I would have a weekly breakfast meeting with all of the new hires, right? So like I would take them for breakfast and I would introduce myself and they would introduce themselves, and there would always be 3 or 4 every 2 or 3 weeks. And it was growing at a rapid pace. And I was just like, there was a problem for me. I remember in 2016 when I didn't know everyone's name, right? And that for me was like, this is no longer my little baby. And I had a bunch of institutional investors who were all fantastic in their own right, but equally troublesome because we were being pulled in various directions. And, I was learning on the job. I still didn't know what I was doing, how I was doing it. And, I was at one point also, I became really sort of arrogant, right? I was a young boy. I was, making a lot of money. I had a business that was valued at, like several million, like, tens of, and we were the talk of the town within the fashion industry. And as a mid to late 20s boy, I can assure you that I wasn't a very good human being at that point. I don't think, if I look back, I was, quite arrogant, and I was, I thought the world was mine and I was going to take it. And I think what happened later in life, I made we got the business to a point where people wanted to buy it, but we were then really damaged by what happened with Brexit. Like that was the biggest thing in my business career that damaged us. That was a macro influence that had no control over what we did. It was done by, the wider population. And, that was an awful experience for me. And that, that process, when it came to selling business, put me back down to earth. I can assure you that I was really, I ended that with a desire to never want to sell a business again because it was an awful process. But I really changed as a person. I think that I went from this sort of very sort of, I guess, opinionated man to someone who, I mean, I was always opinionated. I still am opinionated, but I'm just not arrogant anymore, right? And it takes a shift in your experience to do that. And that experience for me was one that I will never forget, and has brought me up, developed, it's impacted how I behave, who I am. I'm grateful for that experience, by the way. I look back at it and I'm, whilst I despise aspects of, I definitely feel that as a human being, I'm a better person because of it. And so, I take the good with the bad.
Again, there's just so many. I could just sit back and listen to your story all day, and I've got to remember I'm supposed to be hosting this and asking questions. But I could just listen to you because I think I'm nodding non-stop to everything you're saying, and I just don't want the audience to miss anything. By listening to the story, they might miss the learning. And I think one element is what you're saying there. In my view, is sum up of is like bad luck is good luck. Mm-hmm. You've had moments that at the time were probably like you're talking about with Brexit, awful. but somehow
Yeah.
it's made you a better person. And and I think that's really important for people to listen to, especially right now where everyone is having some sort of pain, whether it's just having to stay at home when they don't want to, and so on, and not being able to travel. But somehow there is benefit in the pain, right?
Definitely. And you don't, you definitely don't see it at the time. But I have, and everyone does, evolve with time. Your brain is the only muscle, or the only thing in the whole world that gets better the more you use it, right? Everything else gets worse, including all of your other organs, right? Your brain is the only thing, obviously, come a certain point in time that obviously diminishes, but your brain is the only thing. And this is something else that my dad always taught me, that, that if the more you use, the better it's going to get.
Love it.
And there were points in my life where I've actually noticed within myself a shift, but it takes a life-changing moment for me to experience that. And I think, people shouldn't discount the hardships that they get, because, again, all of these sort of phrases that are sort of, far and few between, and, what doesn't break you makes you stronger. Like, you listen to this statement, you're like, oh, well, that's just BS. Well, I mean, no, it's not BS, but it doesn't mean anything to
It's
you.
a bit like it's good to fail. You're kind of like, why would it be good to fail? Initially these things don't make any sense, do they?
Yeah, and that's why most really successful entrepreneurs have failed 2 to 3 times before they make it.
And in fact, I would argue that personally, I can say if I hadn't failed, I wouldn't have made it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I also think that kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier. If you have the right partner, they also push your brain. Like my wife taught me about the subconscious, and made me realize that I was making decisions based on, things I'd observed in the world that weren't real, weren't true. And so, I think that's again where your partner comes into play, and has a role to play in developing your brain.
Definitely. And I think, what's really helped me over the years, I keep referring back to my father and my mother, right? Because they are who molded me. So my father said, do you pray? And I was like, no, I don't really pray. And I didn't know why he was asking me that question or what he intended by that. But, the way that I have interpreted religion is based on the concept of positivity and energy, right? So it's not necessarily about, like, the higher being is essentially the energies that exist within this universe. And there are things that you can explain, things that you can't explain. Essentially, the concept of positivity, like as a Hindu, we believe in reincarnation, right? So your body is just a vehicle, and your soul is the energy. And when you reincarnate, the reason why we don't bury you, reincarnate, is because you can't destroy energy. You can only transfer energy, right? So your energy as a human right now, I have kinetic energy, I have heat energy, I have all sorts of energy that I'm constantly, taking in and pushing out. When you cremate, you are burning, you're creating heat and light energy that then goes back into the world. And that's why you then, present the ashes into the Ganges or wherever it is, so that it goes back into the soil and la la la. Now, I'm not a super uber religious person, but my interpretation of all of this was, using that positivity as a way to focus on what I want in life. And so every night before I go to bed, I will pray, but my form of prayer is not the same as other people's, right? My form of prayer is, really visualizing what I want in life, what I was visualizing meeting my partner before I met her. Right? I was trying to think about, like, who is it what is the type of person that I want to meet? And what does she look like? What does she do? And when it came to business, what type, I'm grateful. I would always be grateful in these prayers, but I'd also really think about what I want. And what people don't realize is that your brain, you have a subconscious, which is so powerful that it works in itself when you are asleep. And if you focus your mind on a vision, and you allow your subconscious to work on it, like, without realizing, you will be making the steps to get to that point, right? And the universe is such that if you want something enough, it'll give it to you. You've just got to really want it, and you've got to fight for it.
Yeah, I love this insight.
Everything's
Please go ahead. Sorry, I think there's a slight delay. Then go ahead. Sorry.
No, yes. I mean, everything that I've achieved in life has been driven through this concept of visualization through the subconscious, and whether you call it praying, whether you call it anything else, like call it what you will, right? I mean, for me, that's not the point. The point is that, through the hardest times, positivity and that faith of knowing that you can get through it, or at least focusing on, even imagining life, take the current circumstance right now. There's so much really messed up with the world. Ignoring what's just happened with America and people, storming the Capitol building, versus, COVID and all of the unfortunate bereavements around the world. There's a lot of really positive things that you could probably create for yourself. And sometimes you don't know what they are. Sometimes you just want there to be positivity. And then actually that's a really good starting point, right? Maybe you just need to allow your brain in the subconscious before you go to bed. Just try to think about some things that you want to achieve in your life, or, things that you want, milestones. And it doesn't happen immediately, but I can assure you that everything that I have visioned in my subconscious has happened. And I'm a firm believer in that, and call that whatever you will. I am just one that, it will always see the glass half full, and will want to use that as a way to drive my ambition, Bambi's ambition, anyone else that sits around me. I will do my best to, shine light on that.
There's just so many great insights in what you've just talked about. And I think, I wonder where to kind of break it down. I don't want, again, my audience to miss any of these things. I think part of what you're talking about, just explain it a different way, maybe it'd be useful to my audience, is that, what you surround yourself with. For example, if you consume media that's negative, it will make you negative. If you're surrounded by people that are positive, it will make you positive. And so that energy from other people and other forms of communication will affect you. And equally, your own mind is so powerful. It's all about controlling your own mind, right? So I'm an atheist, but that does not mean I don't believe in religion. I am open to all religions. It's actually what it means. I don't want to, I'm not saying any religion is bad or any religion is good. I think all religion has an element in it that is good, which is, be kind to people, be nice, be genuine. All of the religions generally preach that, but of course they can get abused, and those lines can get blurred, and right and wrong, and what is right and what is wrong, and all those things. But I go to bed every night and pray myself in a way. I pray. I say I'm grateful that I've got a beautiful 3-year-old boy, a wonderful wife who I love and loves me. I'm grateful for my experiences. And I don't go to bed with the news playing, telling me about how awful the world is, and I think that does make a huge difference to your subconscious, which is, as you just described, making us breathe right now. It's making us listen or not listen right now. Our subconscious is making decisions for us without us even thinking about it. And the more you put into that subconscious that's positive, the more positive things that will happen, right?
Definitely.
That's how I sum up what you're saying. And there was a couple of things I didn't want to miss that you were talking about as well. A lot of people ask us about culture when they're building their businesses. I mean, I always have this thing. I actually think it's easier to run a big company than a small company. I always loved the 4, 5, 6 people size company because it was like a family. I found 30, 40 people really tough because you couldn't really afford, depending on the business, of course, but in my business, you couldn't really afford middle management. But as you get up to the 100, you can start to have really incredible people in your business, and it actually gets easier. Is that true? Do you think is my view on the world true, or do you have a different view?
So we hired a C-suite, so a chief commercial officer, a chief financial officer, chief marketing officer. These were people who were being paid, 6-digit salaries. I was paying them a lot more than I was paying myself, and they were significantly older and more wiser and more experienced, and they ran the business, right? Like I basically watched them take the business from a 30 million pound business to a 50 million pound business, and I basically did nothing. And it was beautiful. Yeah. Wow. Those were the days when I became arrogant, by the way, is because I was like, I'm doing all this amazing stuff, but I'm not actually doing anything.
But you'd learned a very important tool that you mentioned earlier. You'd learned delegation, which I think is what keeps a lot of businesses small. Yeah. They're not willing to delegate. And so, keeping humble while delegating is pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and the thing is that, the way I would run a business now is different to how I'd run a business back then. But, I needed that to knowledge and to experience. But it's quite hard because I remember I was responsible for everything that was the buying side of Secret Sales. Secret Sales is an online fashion company, right? And it's very different now to what it was before. Before it was a flash sale company. We would host, 20 to 30 different sales per day. Each sale would only last for 4 days, and we would work with 1,600 different brands. And everything would be up to 70% off. So it was like a Bicester Village online, but with time limited sales. What it is now is it's more like it's a marketplace, right? So it's almost like a Farfetch, but for outlets. So it's a discounted model, and it's a very different concept, and it's changed since I sold it. But when I was running the business, I was in charge of all the commercial sides, or everything that we were buying, everything that we were selling, all the negotiations, all of the so I negotiated all the deals. I was the one that signed all the contracts. I was the one that, in the first few years, we had no brands. And then within 2 years, I had 300 brands that I had found a way to work with us and who had contracts. I remember going to Diesel and basically telling Diesel, Replay's just signed up. And then I went to Replay and said, Diesel's just signed up, neither of whom I'd spoken to previously. But then all of a sudden, I've got 2 of the leading denim contracts, right? So it was, I'm not telling anyone that they should do things like that, but I had to make it work.
Well,
right?
I just wanted to interject on this point here because I think what you're talking about is hustle, of course. And I always think hustle is a brilliant word. It's also a negative word, hustle. But what you're talking about there is hustle. And I always say, and I know this is how you're thinking about this, you can say things if they become true. So I think when people say something like they've got Diesel, but you never get Diesel on board, then that's a problem. But if you know you're going to get Diesel on by saying to rely you've got them and vice versa, it's again a bit like you were saying earlier, you speak it, you make it real, you believe it.
Correct.
You're not selling anything that isn't true. And I think that's when hustle is a positive word. Hustle is a negative word if people are selling something that isn't going to happen. That is a lie.
Definitely.
They know it's a lie. That's different. But I think what you just said there, to me, that's not a lie. To me, that's a sales approach that everyone should employ. I've done it too. I've said I got CNN as a client. They asked me, have you got the 25 people you need to work on this contract? I'm like, absolutely, of course I have. I didn't have them in-house ready to go, but in my mind, as soon as they signed that contract, I know the 25 people I'm going to hire. But they didn't want to hear that. If I told them that, I wouldn't have got the contract. It's kind of, so what you're talking about is a very important nuance of entrepreneurship there. But sorry, I interrupted you. But carry on.
No, that's fine. And I guess the point is that, we've got all these contracts. I managed the team of, 15 buyers who were senior buyers. Then beneath them, there was about 7, buyers. Then beneath them, there was junior buyers. Then beneath them, there's assistant buyers and so forth. So there was probably around 25 of us, maybe 30 of us, who I had direct reports of. And one of the hires that I made when I hired the C-suite was a chief commercial officer. And she came in from Thomas Pink. Her name was Melanie. And it was the hardest hire for me because what I was essentially doing is I was replacing myself. Right? She was going to do my job. And I was still sort of sub 30. But I built the business. We were growing at 70% year on year. We were getting brands left, right, and center. Everything was working. But the problem was, the honest truth is that my investors thought that I was too young or inexperienced, and we were getting too big, and so they wanted some experience within the buying. And I was still learning how to govern boards and how to manage my investors, which I think in the early days I was pretty bad at. And so that hire for me, when I was hiring the C-suite, was great in its entirety because suddenly the business went from, we just accelerated and we started doing some really wonderful things, but the hardest hire was that chief commercial officer because I was like, I'm basically making myself redundant. And I was very aware of that. But, it was the right thing at the time. Was it the right thing for the business in the long term? It's debatable. But I learned from her, right? And my view was, I need to learn. I don't know everything. I can't pretend to know everything. I need to bring in people who are better than me and are going to teach me. And I basically, while she was reporting into me, so to speak, I was not really. Didn't feel like that. I felt like I was almost reporting into her to a certain extent because I was. Constantly, rather than telling her what to do, I was constantly just, questioning and challenging rather than directing. And, it was an eye-opening experience for me. But this whole piece about delegating, you've got to do it for the right reasons. And as a CEO of a business, you also need to know what your ceiling is, right? You also need to know, well, I've got the business to 20 million or 30 million or whatever it may be, but am I the right CEO to take it to 200 million? And usually that's
0 to 1 is the hardest thing to do. Actually, I think 0 to 1 is what most people can't do. So if you can do that, sometimes it's good to focus on it. I'm always in admiration. I don't like him, but in admiration of Mark Zuckerberg being able to take it from 0 to what it is today. And I think he's actually struggling.
Crazy.
I would say. But it's definitely an interesting thing to know your bracket and know what you're at. There's something else here. I'm always scared that my listeners might miss the point, very important point you're making, which is as well, there's two things. You said earlier in the podcast about how, you don't need to know something to go and build a business, which is so true. So many people say, I'll go work for a company for a couple of years and then I'll learn the whatever agency world, or I'll learn from NASA and then do space. You can hire the people to teach you to do these things or do the things that you don't know how to do. And you can do what you just talked about, which is challenge, learn, absorb, but you need to be incredibly aware of your weaknesses to hire people to replace you. For example, a lot of people self-sabotage that. I've done that myself. I consider myself a salesperson, and I love sales. I know sales is a dirty word. I've loved building businesses through sales. If you do sales right, it's a relationship builder. You can build friends for life, as I have done through sales. It's not a car salesman thing. I don't think that's necessarily the right way to sell, is just get something out of people. Sales is a relationship thing, and I love sales. But I've tried to hide salespeople, and in a way, I've self-sabotaged it because they're never going to be as good as me. So I'm always showing them how to do it instead of letting them make their own mistakes. And so, when you hire that CMO, that's a really difficult step, because you're also realizing, hold on a minute, I might get shoved out of my own company here.
Yeah. And actually, is around 70% sales, right? Because you need to sell not just yourself, but your business and everything that you're doing. You need to be, a salesperson, right? You need to have the ability to sell your vision. And even as a CEO, if you can't sell the vision of the business, if you can't have a vision in the first place, and then articulate that in a manner that actually, creates the right level of motivation for your team, and also the ability to attract the right level of external investors, your business is not going to go anywhere. So being a salesperson, by the way, shouldn't be a dirty word. It's absolutely mandatory in my eyes. Yeah. You're right. I was probably making myself redundant, but I always think about this, and my brother and I speak about it occasionally. Should we have drafted in a CEO earlier, who could have taken the business to 100 million instead of 50 million? And probably the answer is yes, right? Like if we brought in a CEO, because we were advertising on TV, we had sponsored Friends on Comedy Central, we had sponsored Simpsons on Channel 4, we were advertising on Homeland, we were spending stupid money on TV adverts, but we were growing like anything. And, at that point, we probably should have thought, right, well, I care about shareholder value rather than the massive paycheck that I was getting. Whereas I was the problem was I was arrogant. I wanted the paycheck, right? I wanted to go out into the West End and have these lavish dinners and all of this stuff. I wasn't thinking about the long-term picture well enough. And I think that was probably a big mistake of mine, was to not maybe bring in the right level of expertise earlier, to just say to the board, I think it's time.
But you don't know, at that point, you don't know what you don't know. A lot of my listeners are like this. In a way, you don't know what you don't know, right? There's an element.
It's unknown.
Yeah. And then there's also an element here. There's a nuance here. I just want to pick up on it that you're talking about. I want to understand it. You said earlier that when you hired certain C-suite people, they were paid more than you. Which I have also done. I totally relate to that, and I think a lot of people need to realize that sometimes to get good people in, you have to pay them more than you can pay yourself to get them in and get them into the business, to help the business grow. Because you've got equity, so that's worth more than the salary. But then there sounds like there was a change. Now, did this change happen when you had the investors? It was too many investors involved, and you started to feel disenfranchised, and you felt you needed a salary to compensate that. Was there a change there?
No, I think it was the arrogance in me thinking that I could do it myself, rather than the sensible individual. Because at that point, I didn't think there was a ceiling. Right? I was.
So you just felt like you deserved salary and equity, but you weren't paying yourself less than your staff.
but I'd started the business, so I had the equity. What I also did is we, despite having over 100 people, I gave everyone in the company equity. Everyone had different tiers of equity. The challenge with that, and I think another mistake I made was a lot of people in the earlier entry level roles don't care about equity because they still care about the immediate gratification of a paycheck. And it's only the senior roles that actually where it was more meaningful. And so what I should have done is rather than give 150 people equity, I should have given 10 people equity, but just more of bigger chunks. And that would have probably given me that much more drive from the core personnel that were actually making changes within the business. But we had a phenomenal culture within the company. We had social committees that had monthly budgets to go and do bowling and bowling and cinema and putting money behind the bar. It would just be a monthly event where everyone can go and just have some fun together. We would have 2 epic parties, I'm talking about hiring out the box and going mental. As well as we hired out the box twice. Those were 2 of the best nights of my life, I think. As well as, hiring out part of Hyde Park and turning that into a little festival. And so we were doing we really gave our employees and staff back the love that they needed. We wanted everyone, we wanted them to feel like a family, but we wanted them to all feel like they owned some of Secret Sales, and that, and that was a really beautiful thing. And something that I think I'll take into the new businesses that I'm involved in now is, incentivizing correctly, but doing it in a way that, gives the right level of motivation. I'm a big believer in giving equity where it's due. And, what's really hard, I think, and what I'm concerned about is ever getting back to that level of that cultural sort of experience, because it was so beautiful. All of a sudden, by the way, when we sold the company to private equity, the culture changed, right, almost immediately, and we never got it back. And one of the hardest things that they did, one of the hardest things that they did was they made my brother and I fire all of the key people within the business. So their view was, we're buying this business, let's stream it a little bit. And they thought that they could use their experience and team. So anyone above a 60 or 70,000 pound pay grade was made redundant immediately. And my brother and I had to do that. And some of my employees were with me for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Like one of the girls was with me for 10 years. Like she was my second or third employee. And her name was Monica. She was Polish. She couldn't even speak English when she joined me. She was a cleaner, right? But I took her and all of her friends who were all clean service building we were in, and we gave them jobs, and they stayed with us, and we let them grow within the business. And there was a lot of love, they made us, make these people redundant. And it was the hardest thing I think I've ever had to do in my life. I had tears in my eyes. I had to read off, my brother had to read off a sheet. I couldn't even do it.
You're making me feel emotional just talking about it. I know the feeling. I know exactly what you mean. It's awful. Yeah, this is why you bought the company back, right? You realized, it was a wonderful thing to sell a company, and then you'd realize perhaps you'd sold it to the wrong people.
Well, and I also, look, there's that, but there's also, I didn't realize how beautiful the company was as a place to be, in terms of its culture and everything else. And look, I don't look back with a heavy heart. It is what it is, right? It's a life experience.
Amazing life experience. Was it hard to buy the company back?
Well, look, the business, because of the changes. So what happened is that these guys who bought the business, they made, these 50 or 60 people, whatever it was, redundant. But it was those 50 or 60 people who made Secret Sales so successful, right? It was those people that made the company so, so beautifully in its operations, in its environment. And so the people that were left were very entry level, employees, and they didn't have the culture. They didn't bleed green blood, is the way that we described it. And so the culture just went in one night. It went, everything that was so beautiful about the business no longer existed. And what also went was not just the culture, but the knowledge of how the business needed to be run, and the contacts within the buying team and everything else.
It's just insane that someone would buy a company and do that, isn't it? I just can't even comprehend that is a good strategy.
Well, we then went from a 50 million pound business to a 30 million pound business within the space of 12 months, and that for me was very emotional. Right? I was like,
Because you were still working there, right? You had an earn out
yeah, yeah,
based
yeah, yeah,
system for you. Yeah.
exactly.
Right. Yeah.
So the plan was, transition out at some point. Um, it's hard to work under someone else,
Yeah.
right? When you've been, and so that was never really the plan. But to see the company go 20 million down, and then for them to think, well, this is not the business that we wanted to buy, and we ended up buying the company back because for me at that point it was about legacy. It wasn't about money. And then I realized that what we had bought back was a problem child, right? There was a lot of issues because the people that I needed to fix it were all fired within a year, and or within the year before. And I then decided that we needed to plug some money. So we were able to find some additional cash. We put some money in ourselves, and we were just fortunate enough to be able to sell the company a second time round to two very astute entrepreneurs who are running the company now. But they're running it in their own way. They're doing it very differently to how we ran it. And, it's not the same company, but it still has the opportunity to still, be a really big business. And they're just going about it slightly differently to how we were. I'm grateful to them for the energy and love that they're giving the business. And for me, it still becomes something that I'm very attracted to. I'm attracted, I want Secret Sales to be around in 10 years or 20 years. It's not about my day-to-day involvement. It's about me saying to my children or my grandchildren, look, I started that,
Yep. This is another nuance that people are missing when they're talking about get rich and all this stuff. It is about legacy. It's about building a brand of a business. It is about saying, I have exactly the same feeling. I sold my company to PwC, and I have a business called Nest that I've sold. I still want these companies to do well every single time. I once had the head of PwC say to me, oh, you know what, Simon, we bought that company off you. It's 10 times bigger now. Do you wish you'd held on to it and you could have got more? I'm like, no, I'm really happy for you. I'm really happy for the business. Like, there's not a single moment where I think, oh, I wish I'd hold on to it and made more. I'm glad it worked. I'm glad it still works, And I think that's something maybe some corporate people don't understand, because to the corporate person, it's like, well, you could have got a lot more money for it, Simon, if
Sure.
Didn't you realize you were on the cusp of something, 10 times bigger than you had it? I'm like, no, I'm happy.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that the gauge for success tends to be numerical, right? It's how much money have you made. But actually, what people don't realize until much later in their journey is, what's important to a lot of people is the experience, the learning, the takeaways, and equally, what success looks like for different people. Because for me now, success is not just about money, right? Success is about my family. It's about my future. It's about different levels of ambition that I'm focusing on. Whereas before, when I started a company, it was like, let's make as much money as we can, right? Whereas now, it's not about let's just make as much money as we can. It's about, how can I live the best life that I can live, which is about happiness and about health and about mindfulness and about, being a good human being, right? That's really important to me now, is how can I help other people and how can I help myself and how can I do all of this stuff in a way that is impactful.
Yeah, I love it, and I can relate. And do you? Can I just step back a second? There's a couple of things. I'm conscious of time. There's a couple of things I want to ask you before I let you go and get on with your day. I guess I wanted to understand your co-founder relationship with your brother. I think you mentioned something very important earlier about how you had very different skills, but you sound like you had the same moral code. I do think that's a real important tip for people. Have different skills in your co-founder, but ideally the same moral code. But how did it start? Did you and your brother sit down and say, oh, what about this? And just, start the business? A lot of people want to know how to get started, the zero bit. What happened for you and your brother? How did that happen?
So it wasn't anything to do with that. There was an opportunity. There was a company in France that was doing flash sales. And with our limited knowledge within the fashion space, because of what we've been exposed to through our father, it just resonated with us on a personal level. And we then presented it to our dad. We were like, look, this is what we're thinking about doing. And he didn't understand it because it's digital, right? He is a bricks and mortar, real, true, like a pure play retailer, but that's sort of high street driven. And he was supportive, but ultimately it was literally seeing something that didn't exist in the UK and doing it to the point that actually wasn't, like I'm a big believer in not worrying about reinventing the wheel, right? You don't need to change the world by coming up with something completely new. I mean, if you can, that's great, right?
Well, there's
Really
very few
fantastic.
original ideas anyway. I mean, Facebook is a copy of MySpace, MySpace is a copy of Friendster, right? There's no original idea anyway.
Right. And that's the point, is that all you need to do is you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to do it better. And in a lot of cases, it becomes the marketing and the positioning of your brand. So, I give you an example of this new business that I'm trying to create, which is within the gold space, direct to consumer gold, will be in the form of gold jewelry. Right. But there's going to be a twist on it, which I don't want to talk about right now. I want it to come as a surprise when I launch it. But the point is, I'm not reinventing the wheel. What I am doing is I'm making it look, well, it is different in the way in which you purchase it, but it's still gold jewelry, right?
It's still gold trading.
It's
I
still
think
gold trading.
you're bringing a
Exactly.
personal element to it. And there you go. Gold
Exactly.
trading's been around 100 odd years since people started digging gold out of the mines, right? I mean, it's so, but you're reinventing you're not even reinventing, you're just changing the way it's traded. I can kind of guess the business model just listening to you. And I don't think, I mean, I always think, again, ideas are quite cheap, right? To actually go out and execute any idea is the real hard work, right? So, but when I don't want to miss the bit about with your brother. So you and your brother said, oh, here's a flash sale model that's working in France. We can do that here. You spoke to your father about it. He supports you, but doesn't necessarily understand it because it's a traditional retailer. Then what do you two do? What's the first couple of steps for my listeners to understand what they can do?
We had someone that worked with my father and was in the rag trade for many years, and him and his wife sort of joined forces with us, and we met every few weeks to just talk initially about the business, what it would need to look like. They were interested to get involved on an investment level, but equally operational. And the first 6 months was research. What are we going to call it? How does the business need to work? What do we need to do? And the second 6 months was taken building it, right? We then went to a creative agency who built the platform, who designed our logo. We had already come up with the name and bought that, which was Secret Sales. We were going to call it Noble Secret at first, but Noble Secret didn't mean anything. And then my brother stumbles along Secret Sales and we were like, oh my God, that's gold. And we bought it off an American business for like a couple of grand. And then that was it. Like, we owned the global rights to that name, and
you trademarked it, right? Because that's the thing a lot of people miss. They forget to trademark it. A lot of people forget to trademark these brands. They got the URL and the company registration. They forget to trademark.
No, you need to trademark. But the thing is, and we trademarked it globally, but we didn't trademark every single country in the world. So it's funny because we then had some people in other countries trying to sell us our own name off, like out in like. I can't remember.
Those damn entrepreneurs.
They're entrepreneurs, right?
They're annoying entrepreneurs, right? But they're entrepreneurs. Yeah.
So, and the second 6 months was spent building it, and then as I said, and then I went to Italy and I bought some stuff from a bunch of wholesalers that I was trying to build relationships with, and we started selling it. I mean, literally, like, no idea on what on earth to do and at what point. It was just, this is what we want to try and do. Let's just, like, meander our way to the point that actually gets us live. And then when we're live, let's make, the key is to remain nimble, right? And to acknowledge that there's a mistake and to change it quickly.
Listen to the market.
The problem is when you sit on the mistake and you don't change it. It's like when the saying, hire slow, fire fast, right? Which is, if there's someone in the business not well, I don't want to keep them in the business. You want to essentially, as a CEO, make the changes as quickly as possible so that you're effective. And it's the same with running a business, right? Is that you need to cut the fat off super fast, and you need to do that effectively. The hard part is knowing that it's fat, and that comes with experience and time.
It's interesting that hire slow, fire fast thing, because I think I find that really hard to hire slow. That's why I always say, bring me in at the very end, because I meet people, I believe in them, and I want to work with them, and I don't know until I do what they're really going to be like. So I still hire fast, but I've learned to fire fast because it's the hardest thing in the world to let someone go, even if you've only known them a week. Sure. Still bloody hard, right? That's one of the hardest things as an entrepreneur, isn't it? So
definitely.
it's such a great story, and I'm really conscious. I'm going to have you back on because honestly, I think I could sit here all afternoon just listening to your insights and stories. And I've got so many other questions that I haven't had a chance to ask you, and I'm just very conscious of your time. But again, when the gold business is up and running, we'll share it. Please, when it's ready. I want to see
Thank
that
you.
new journey. You said something earlier about how you'd start a business today would be very different to how you started it before. I want to ask you that question in another podcast because I think it could be a long answer, but I think it'd be really interesting to
Sure.
dissect the learnings, because a big part of it, a lot of 20-year-olds out there starting businesses. I want to transfer that knowledge to them. You're standing on the shoulders of giants like you. They can see further. They can get that knowledge now. Then there's all sorts of learnings that can come from people doing things faster, better based on your experience. I also wanted to ask you about your radio station. You said you got into trouble. I really want to know what that trouble is. And so we have to have you back on for that. I think
I would love to.
Yeah, I think the other thing I wanted to get into education. I mean, you've kind of talked about Imperial College and that experience. I wanted to talk a bit more about education with you. So another thing we need to have you back on to talk about. And
Sure.
then, so maybe when you've launched your business, you come back on and tell us about your new business in full, and we can ask you these questions. But I would like to end with just one final question, which is, if you went back to your younger self and gave advice, what would it be?
So when I brought in the C-suite, these senior guys who were essentially going to be running the business, I gave them a lot of trust and reliance, and I sat back and I let them run the business. And one of the things that I look back on and I feel like I would have done differently is, I just let them get on with it. I didn't micromanage the way that I was micromanaging previously. And I didn't micromanage because I thought, well, this is going to emasculate them, or it's patronizing, for them to, but actually that's not true. Like, I was the founder of the business. I had every right to be challenging. And the mistake I made was that even by hiring these 5 new people who were extremely experienced and well seasoned, they all came with their own cultural influences, right? So then the business started to change in itself. The people that we started to hire within the buying team, because of the lady that I hired, they all became mirrors of her rather than mirrors of me, right? And so then there was conflict and politics that started to come out of the woodwork. We were not looking at the detail. Things were going really well, but then they started not going, like there were things within the business that then started not going well. And I think that was because I let go of the reins. And so, it's important in my instance and experience to have brought these people in. The mistake I made was to just completely rely on them doing what's right. I think as a founder of a business, it's still your business, it's still your vision, it's still your baby, and you have every right to articulate that in a manner that is absorbed and maybe molded slightly, and then regurgitated back out through them. But it is ultimately, I felt like the business was we had lost sight of who we were when I hired these people, and that for me was an issue.
Again, such amazing self-awareness and such a nugget of gold if young people can pick up on this, because new entrepreneurs don't even have to be young. I think this concept, what you're talking about in my view, is you failed to teach your management team the culture.
Yeah.
And you didn't know what the culture was. You didn't realize it wasn't just it wasn't just a business, it was a culture. And you failed to teach them that. And funnily enough, you make me think of, I've just watched the Steve Jobs movie with Fassbender in it, the other one. Not with Aston Kutcher.
I haven't seen that yet. I've been meaning to watch it. Is it good?
I really liked it. I preferred it to the Aston Kutcher one. And one of the things I took away that you've just made me think of my thought during the movie, which was that, if Steve Jobs had hired the CEO, the Pepsi guy, and instead of letting him, letting the Pepsi guy advise Steve Jobs, which was kind of the dynamic, right? It was like, I'll come to you because you're the seasoned CEO of Pepsi, and I'll get advice from you, which is kind of how the movie shows him. Steve Jobs goes to him and he tells him things, right? But if he'd done it the other way around, if Steve Jobs had been the guy telling the Pepsi CEO the things that he knew, that would have been a very different outcome, I think, for that company. Whether it would have been better today or not, that's a different matter. But I think the company wouldn't have declined in the way that it did. And he blamed hiring the wrong person. Steve Jobs never said this, but it was my thought going through my mind when watching the movie. The mistake he made was not hiring a seasoned CEO, but was not teaching that CEO the culture and entrepreneurship in the way that Steve Jobs knew it. And that's exactly what I think you've just said is the thing you go back to your younger self as an entrepreneur and teach.
Exactly. You put the nail on the head.
Yeah.
I hope I don't make the same mistake.
No, well, you're aware of it. I mean, isn't learning from mistakes about being aware of these things? I think basically it's about that learning. I think a lot of people make mistakes. The one mistake people make about making mistakes, I think, is that they don't learn the right lessons from that mistake. So, for example, someone will take a risk and bet on a startup and it fails, and they'll learn, I shouldn't invest in startups. They're a big risk. And I'll say, no, you didn't invest in enough startups. That's the lesson you should learn. Or you didn't do enough due diligence, or you didn't get involved enough in helping that startup be successful. That's the lesson, not that you shouldn't invest or take risk, right? So it's always learning the right lessons, and you've learned the right lessons. And I'm so grateful that you take the time to share those insights with us today, because for people to admit their mistakes, I think shows what a human being you are, or you're willing to talk about it. Your CV is mind-blowing. I mean, what you've actually achieved, most people dream of. And here you are sitting here talking about all the mistakes you made and how you have these insights, and you're sharing them with people instead of talking about how much money you made and how much, you're sharing the insights that I think are gold. And I really, really appreciate it. And I know my listeners will too. So thank you.
I'm really grateful for you inviting me onto this podcast, and I honestly, I've done quite a few of these in the past, and I really enjoyed this one. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to sum up a few things. I just want to make sure don't get lost in the mix. That just at the end, I know some people skip to the end, so they have to listen to these end bits, but maybe then go back and listen to the full podcast and make the effort to pick up all the insights in detail. Sure. But here's a few of the things. I think you've mentioned the word fun a few times in your business. You had a lot of fun, the Hyde Park experience, and so on. It's so important to have fun in your business, and I really want it to come through, and I think you've highlighted it quite a few times. I don't want people to miss it. You mentioned equity earlier and how you gave equity to everyone, which sounds like the perfect thing to do, but you highlighted another important lesson, I think, which is equity isn't for everyone. That also can equal responsibility. If the business isn't making money, they've got debt and liability. And just because you believe equity is the only way to go forward in your business doesn't mean to say that your people working with you feel the same way. So, don't read a book about how it's good to give everyone equity and create a co-op like John Lewis, for example, in the UK. It doesn't necessarily equal success. And I think what you talked about there, about the nuances of understanding your colleagues, understanding what they really need, what they really want, is important, not trying to just with a sledgehammer say, well, if I give everyone equity, they're going to care about the business. I've had experience where I gave equity to someone because I thought it would make them better at their job. It didn't make any difference. They were going to be bad at their job with or without equity. Just bottom line. I think the point you make, we all need a PD and a Bambi in our lives. I think it's. I actually felt very emotional when you were talking about your father, because I lost my father at 15 years old. So it's such a wonderful thing to have a father like you've got, and I think we can all find mentors like that. You're lucky to be born into a family where you have that relationship, but there are PDs out there that will take risks on you and bet their house on you and do that. I know it. I've seen it, and it's wonderful to hear. I also like the point you mentioned earlier about 1960s, and he was an immigrant and he couldn't get a job, and that kind of, let's say, I think he taught himself to be an entrepreneur because there was kind of no choice. And I think that's very relevant today. And I mean, a lot of young people say, it's easier for people before, houses were cheaper, this was cheaper. It's actually easier now. There is no better time than now to start a business, you said. And I couldn't agree more. It was actually harder in the 60s. There wasn't the internet or LinkedIn to find the contact you need, or the ability to live broadcast to millions of people instantly for free and compete with Walmart right now globally. You don't need to open up all their stores. There is no better time, you said, than right now to start a business, and I could not agree more. But I also love the point that difficult times where your father, because of racism, because of whatever reason, wasn't able perhaps to get a job, that he just decided to create businesses for himself and taught himself to become an entrepreneur. I think the same is today possible. Maybe because of COVID, you can't get a job, and you might see in your son later that was the best thing that's ever happened to you. And this time right now was an amazing period of history to be living through and experience. I also, I think everyone should start a pilot radio show or do a podcast. Sach, I actually want you to come on and co-host this radio station with me at some point. I'm calling it a podcast because it sounds trendier, but in true reality, it's just an updated version of a radio show. I'd love to get in some trouble with you, whatever trouble you got into before. I reckon we could do it 10x here. I love the co-founder must be different from you point. I can't emphasize this enough. In all the co-founders I've had, I either love to run it on my own or have a co-founder who's very different to me, which can sound very hard to make happen because someone different to you might not necessarily be in your circle. So, Datch was lucky enough to have his brother in his life who's very different to him, but he knows him, and that's a wonderful dynamic. But I do think if you're going to get a co-founder, it's very powerful to have someone with different skills to you. Do try to keep that in mind and learn from Datch's experience. I think this use your brain more point is really important too. There's plenty of ways to learn. You don't have to go to school to learn is my thesis, but doing what Datch has done, start a business, hire people that can teach you things. I really think that to me is again gold. There's no original idea. Don't forget that. If someone says you're copying someone else's idea, well, who isn't? I lived in China for a long time. I remember Peter Thiel coming out and saying, oh, everyone in China is copying. Well, today they're innovating. Yes, Facebook, he invested in Facebook, Peter Thiel. He invested in a business that copied someone else's business, right? So everyone's copying everyone else. Let's not judge. I think you can copy morally. Personally, I don't like, for example, stealing people's domain names and holding them on and copying in that way. But I think looking at someone's idea and seeing a way to do it better, that is how we move forward as a universe. You've got to keep improving on what's already out there. So there is no original idea is another thing I've taken away from you. I like the point you mentioned as well about failure. We keep bringing it up. You might fail and the stats will show you probably will. But you said, but don't let that stop you starting. Right, that's just gold. We should put that on a t-shirt, and I want people to never forget. It's not about failing for failing's sake. It's actually a good experience to fail, and the nuance of it's good to fail. It's very important. I think you've hopefully got that from Datch today and his insights. I could go on and on. I want to meet Bambi. I think we should have her on the show too. I'd love to hear her entrepreneurial journey. She pushes out her career. I'm glad to hear she's learned delegation and given you responsibility for the record label creation. And I'm really glad that delegation is also a word we talked about a bit today. It's not come up in any of the other 80-odd podcasts I've done. I think delegation is a really important part of growing as a human being. Without, as you said at the end, without delegating to a point where there are certain things that are still your responsibility. In your case, teaching the management team, you brought in culture. There is an element of delegation that's very important to learn, but there's also an element that your dad held on to, sounds like, by not delegating, which was the culture of the business, and that need to keep that in check, no matter what you do. So there's delegation to a point, I think, is the end conclusion on that insight today.
Definitely.
Thank you again for taking the time to share your story with us. You've been an awesome guest, and I'm so grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Good Luck Club podcast. I hope you found Datch's insights useful. I absolutely believe with all my heart that what he's going to do next will blow your mind. So stay tuned for that when he comes back on the podcast. In the meantime, I put his links and his business links and his partner links and his mother's links all down below. So if any of the businesses he's talked about today are interesting to you, go follow them on social media or give them a like. Equally, it doesn't cost anything to give a like. So it sounds like his mother's business is new or growing and doing great things. Go follow her social media and say hello and give her a thumbs up for bringing up a brilliant boy, brilliant son, a brilliant man and a brilliant person. So I want to say to you guys, thank you. We know you have thousands of podcasts you could be listening to. In fact, I just looked, 784,000 podcasts you could be listening to, and you've taken the time out to listen to ours, and I want you to know we feel incredibly lucky.